Hello and welcome to another episode of the Coffee and Podcast, where specialty coffee means so much more. We are on a quest to cultivate freedom for victims of human trafficking, all while drinking wicked awesome coffee. I'm super excited for this episode today. We have Lucy McCray on, who is the CEO of Freedom Story. Freedom Story's mission is to prevent child exploitation through culturally relevant programs for vulnerable children. They're also passionate about sharing stories that will inspire creative and compassionate people to get involved and to act. So if that's you listening today, get ready, because I think we're going to get you motivated and excited to get involved. As always, I just share with these types of episodes that we do talk about more sensitive material in any episode that's titled Coffee and Blank. And so we should encourage viewer and listener discretion. If that's something you're not ready for, you may want to take another time to listen to it. But otherwise, we're super excited to jump in. All right. So, Lucy McCray, thank you so much for joining today on the Coffee and Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, we're super pumped to hear more about Freedom Story. So let's just start there. Can you just tell us a little bit about Freedom Story and your role with Freedom Story?
Absolutely. So Freedom Story is a child trafficking prevention organization. So we're based in northern Thailand, and we essentially identify the children in the region who are most at risk of trafficking. It's historically been a source for sex trafficking in Thailand, and now we see kind of labor trafficking to other parts of the world. So we identify the kids that we know who are most at risk. So just like you have risk factors for things like heart disease or cancers, there's a lot of risk factors that are present in children and that make them vulnerable to trafficking. And we know that traffickers are out there targeting kids that are the most vulnerable. So we work with that group of kids, and we basically target them to not only really prevent that from happening, but really to enable them to lead thriving and really great lives. So that's through our kind of holistic prevention program, which involves educational scholarships and mentorship and human rights programming and income generation programming for the families as well.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that introduction. We are definitely going to be unpacking more of that as we go through. Let's back up a little bit and just hear more about you. What's some of your background? How did you get involved with Freedom Story and just the anti-trafficking movement in general?
Yeah, great. I heard about trafficking in 2008. So that was, if you kind of remember, back when I think trafficking was kind of first bursting onto the scene and people were really talking about it in a big way. And I had never really heard of anything like it before. I was in high school. I was so horrified to think that there were kids, especially kids my age, globally experiencing these things. And I felt very motivated to do something about it for my career. I ended up pursuing a degree in international development and then wanting to get some international experience. So I actually moved over to Thailand with an organization called IJM, and I worked with them for 2 years in Thailand. Loved working alongside the local people, loved Thailand, love what IJM do, and I still have so much respect for them, and we work and partner with them in many ways. But they're very targeted in the kind of aftercare and rescue space. And after meeting victims and chatting with people, it was just so emotionally taxing. And I started to wonder, is there a way to prevent these things from happening? What does that look like? Is that possible? I had never heard people talk about it. And that was kind of when I met Freedom Story. And that was 6 years ago. So I've been in Thailand for 8 years, which is kind of wild.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, International Justice Mission, we've done some things with them as well. Incredible organization. And so you were with them in Thailand for a season. And then it's interesting, you met some people from Freedom Story. So I guess, how did Freedom Story get involved in Thailand? We know how you got there, but how did you connect with them there, and what are they doing there?
Yeah, Freedom Story really started from a group of Americans who went over in 2007 to make a documentary about trafficking. So again, back when people were really starting to talk about it for the first time, they went with the intention to make a documentary maybe about folks that had already been trafficked or kind of show that side. But when they met people on the ground, and particularly the man who went on to be a co-founder, but at the time was a translator, he basically said to them, I've never actually had a term for this phenomenon, but this is happening in my village, and I can take you to meet some people that this has happened to and kind of show you some kids that they're very vulnerable to this happening. So they actually went up to Chiang Rai, which is in the very far north of Thailand, and met with children met a young girl in particular named Kat and made a documentary called The Soul Project. So that documentary launched the organization. There was no intention at the time to really make an organization, but I think they saw Kat was so vulnerable but had so much potential. And they really wanted to provide a way for her to stay in school. They saw that education really provides opportunity to people, and opportunity provides choice. And that's really what a lot of kids need. And so launched an organization off the back of that documentary called The Soul Project. Ran under that name for almost maybe 7 or 8 years. And then we started to realize, our mission and our drive is really for freedom. It's not about selling. And so we rebranded as Freedom Story back in 2017.
Wow, amazing. So the intent was for a documentary, which is mainly mobilization, but there on the ground, opportunity arose, and maybe just getting such a close taste and experience of what's happening, and knowing that you can do something. Sounds like these people said, "Well, let's be involved. Let's do something now." And what was the name of that documentary one more time, so our people can look that up?
The documentary was called The Soul Project.
Okay, got it. So definitely encourage our viewers to listen to that. So y'all work with children. What age children do y'all normally work with?
Oh, that's a great question. We have figured out that our greatest impact happens with kids between the ages of about 10 or 11 and 18 or 19. I'm sure we all remember being that age, and that's when you are vulnerable to friends and family and winds changing and just really start to have a lot of challenges, but that's kind of the target group we work with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And education comes up a lot on your website. You've already mentioned it here. Help us understand better the connection between giving children good education and trying to keep them out of trafficking circles.
Yeah, so in Thailand, they'll tell you that education is free, but in reality, you have to pay for uniforms, books, transportation, food. If your child has a foreign teacher over which you have no choice. So if there happens to be a foreign teacher there, you have to pay extra. If your child happens to study in a room with air conditioning, you have to pay extra for those things. And so the costs really add up. And we have found through our research that it can be up to 33% of a family's income for one child. And often families have more than one child. So it gets to be very prohibitively expensive for people that are living in poverty. And what ends up happening is they make the difficult choice to pull their kids out of school, thinking that, I saved the money on the education and this child also can make money by going to work. But because they don't have enough education, the kids are really not eligible for kind of a job that would keep them safe. And so it's very easy for somebody in the village or somebody in the family to say, oh, I have a great opportunity for you in a different place, a different village, a different city, a different country. You can work as a maid, you can work in my restaurant. And then when they take those opportunities, because they seem like a good option to kind of help bring in more income to support their families, they can often be situations where the kids end up exploited or end up trafficked.
Wow. I remember this was really eye-opening to me a few years back, because I think when we picture, and maybe this was just me, but I know others that think this way, when we think of human trafficking, a lot of times we go straight to the abduction kind of visual, right? Someone is literally just taken and forced. And that does happen. I mean, we've had people on this podcast that have shared about situations like that. And it's all terrible. It seems like a more common form of people getting into trafficking is kind of that coercion. It's like these small lies. It's opportunities being masqueraded as something better. They say it's going to be this great work opportunity, but it's actually not, right? Or they say they're going to be someone who actually cares about them, but they actually don't. And it's a lot of manipulation that gets people into these trafficking situations. And so, we're talking about prevention, and education seems like a big component. And let's stick on that for a second. I'm kind of curious, what's the solution? If it seems like it's tough for parents to keep their kids in school because of the costs, so they take them out of school and then say, "Hey, let's get to work." And a lot of times, these work situations can funnel them right into trafficking. How do y'all get children more involved, or get parents to see maybe the value of that in Thailand?
Right. Yeah. Such a good question. So we work work really closely with families, with parents, not only to provide the resources that they need to stay in school in the form of a monthly stipend, but we actually are really careful even not to provide the entire amount that they would need, because we want that buy-in from the family as well. We want the parents and the family to be bought into the idea of education. I think the other thing that parents struggle with from a kind of mental perspective is, the idea of delayed gratification, right? If you're someone living in poverty and you're working today in order to eat today and you need to work tomorrow to eat tomorrow, the idea of delayed gratification and kind of investing now in your child's education in order for them to kind of be able to make more money or be safer or more secure in the future is really hard to wrap your mind around. Not because they're not intelligent, but just because they almost can't plan for the future. They don't have the luxury of planning for the future. I will never forget, this was very recent. This was this year. I was talking to one of the parents of one of our students and interviewing her to kind of help share their story. Two older parents in their mid 60s, and the girl is 12. And I asked mom, I said, "Hey mom, like, what's your dream for her as she gets older?" And mom said, "We really need her to take care of us when we're old." And I was like, "Yeah, I know that that's the case. But like, what are your dreams for her? That's a dream for you. What's your dream for her?" And she said, "Well, we really need her to take care of us when we're old." And I was sort of getting frustrated because I was like, "No, I get it. This isn't about you. This is about her." And tried to ask it a different way, kind of got the same answer. And then finally, the mom explained to me a little bit more. I've worked my whole life. They're actually coffee harvesters. I've worked my whole life, and it's starting to get difficult for me to physically work. And she had about $100 saved, right? And I sat there and I thought, oh, it's not like, it would be nice for her to send us some money every once in a while when we're older. It's like, oh no, we need her to help support us when we're old, because we will not be able to support ourselves and we have nothing to fall back on. And so, helping folks that are in that day-to-day situation wrap their minds around delayed gratification and investing in their kids so that they can take care of them when they're old in a safe way really takes a lot of mentorship and a lot of working alongside the families. So that's also a big piece of what we do. I represent about 30 local staff who work alongside our families in a very kind of close and intimate way to help them really understand the value of education, really understand their kids better, and we work with a really diverse group of children and families. And our staff come from all of these different ethnic groups and are able to literally speak the ethnic languages and connect with the families in that way. So that's really valuable.
Wow. So y'all seem to really be walking along with the families in this as well. Not so clearly a focus on the children and making sure that they're getting an education and going through preventative learning and making sure they're not getting into trafficking situations. And yet it's also, that can't be apart from the parents. And so y'all have a strategic approach to also say, all right, parents, we need you to see the value in this as well. And I find it fascinating that they are coffee farmers. Something we talk a lot about and I'm really passionate about is ethical sourcing, and how we need to really rethink a lot of the ways we buy our stuff, because there's lots of we're hearing it right now, situations where poverty is being supported by our buying habits. And if we're not paying attention to how we buy our coffee, our tea, our items, we could be supporting situations like this without even knowing it. And like you said, when people are so focused on their needs, they can't dream. We can't look ahead, right? We're just trying to get by. And boy, what if we rethought the way we bought things so that way it wasn't enabling that sort of thinking, but instead causing people to start dreaming? And love how y'all are also literally providing funds. You said you don't provide everything for them, but you're helping. You're helping with the immediate need to say, this is so important to us that we're going to help your children get the education as well. So love that work and what y'all are doing there. So we're talking prevention, and we've kind of I would say focused on education a lot. You mentioned a couple other things: income generation skills. What other programs do y'all have, or methodology do y'all have to help children not get into trafficking situations?
We also do a lot with raising awareness, not just of what trafficking is, right? Like, it's helpful to know the definition of what it might look like in your situation, but what causes people to be vulnerable, and then also helping people to really access their rights. So those minority groups I mentioned in Thailand often lack access to basic human rights because they don't have the right documentation. There's this phenomenon over there called statelessness. It's a little hard for us to wrap our mind around as Americans, but essentially you can be born in Thailand and not have any documents and then end up without citizenship in any country. And without citizenship, you don't have access to education, transport, travel, the right to travel, the right to healthcare. So we help as much as we can to get kids the highest legal status that they're eligible for, so that they can live more freely, access more of their rights. Their parents can access more of their rights. That family whose story I just told, we helped her get a better, basically legal status this year that gives her greater rights in Thailand. So that was really exciting. And then we also work with families to help them do income generation projects. So small scale, but again, when you're living in poverty, these small changes make a big difference. So planting vegetables, raising chickens, raising fish. Maybe they're eating the vegetables and they don't have to go out and buy it at the market, and they're saving some money there. Maybe they're selling it to their neighbors. Maybe, some folks have even set up stalls at the local market to sell things, or they might set up a grilled chicken stand at the school and sell that for lunch, helping people just to find additional sources of income.
Absolutely. And it seems like, and I guess help me ballpark, it's not going to be exact, but some sort of percentage. How many of these situations where children get pulled into trafficking would you say is due to financial reasons?
Ooh, anyone can be trafficked, right? You do hear about folks that are not living in poverty who end up trafficked, but certainly in the situation and context we're living in, I would say 90% of the kids that end up in these situations, it's due to a financial driver. And we kind of talk about, as much as people are traffickers, poverty can also really be a trafficker, and really just causes so much vulnerability.
Yeah. Wow. So my next question is, you've been the CEO. Well, how long have you been the CEO now of Freedom Story?
I've only been CEO for about a year, but I've been with Freedom Story for 6 years.
Okay. What do you think is a key skill that you have to operate an organization like this? This is permission to brag for a minute, okay? So don't be shy. But what's a key skill that you think it takes to run? I mean, you said 30 staff on the ground in Thailand. I imagine y'all maybe have more staff in other places. What's a skill or quality that it takes to run an organization like this?
That's such a good question. I think, being good with people, right? I interact with, in my job, such a wide variety of stakeholders. I talk to, folks that are on our supporting side, who are individuals who are giving to us. I talk to foundations that are giving us grants and want to know more about our strategy. I work with my colleagues who are helping with fundraising and admin on our US operations. I'm helping support our Thai staff and what they do. I get to spend time with our students and their families, talk to the Thai government, talk to local teachers. It's a lot of different folks that you get to interact with, and really trying to help everyone get on the same page and have the same context to move. We all have the same goal. We all want to protect kids. We all want to give them the best possible future. And it's just about kind of making sure your messaging and your communications with each of those groups helps to bring them along on that journey. So I think that's something that really helps. I would love to say organization. I really try to be more organized. So that's probably another thing that would help me a bit more if I developed that.
Nice. I can only imagine the amount of coordination and, like you said, communication, just making sure everyone's on the same page, because you all have the same heart, all have the same vision. Execution is a whole different level. It's not the exact great place to apply this, but we have a saying with our leadership that ideas are cheap. There's a time for ideas and there's a time for dreaming, but execution and expectation is a whole different level of intentionality and communication and struggle, right? And it'll take one idea, it can take lots of execution to actually see through. So neat. Okay. And then what is one of the greatest challenges that you think you're facing or Freedom Story is facing right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably the biggest challenge we have at the moment is this new form of trafficking, actually, that's popped up in the last 2 years. So we are based right on the border in northern Thailand. Actually, if you remember a few years ago, the boys that got stuck in the cave, that was in Chiang Rai. And so that's where we are. We border Laos on one side and Myanmar or Burma on the other side. And both of those countries have what's called special economic zones right on that border. So it's essentially a space, a physical economic area that allows people more freedom to set up businesses and a little bit less regulation. Unfortunately, those areas have been taken over by bad actors who are setting up huge compounds to run scam centers. So things like both scams, all kinds of scams that I'm sure you're touched by in your day-to-day life. We certainly are in Thailand. Everything from fake credit cards to, you have a package you have to pay for, to products that are not real that are being sold online, to what's called pig butchering. So developing a relationship with somebody online and then eventually starting to ask them for money, to online gambling, crypto gambling, all types of things. So what we're seeing is that people are being trafficked from all over the world. It really is kind of crazy, not just Thailand and neighboring countries, but as far away as Ethiopia, Uganda, India, Indonesia, America, even the UK, to Thailand, and then taken over the border into these areas and held physically in these compounds to conduct these online scams. And so it's and what we're seeing is a huge amount of violence if people are not meeting their quotas, if people try to escape. Huge amounts of violence and almost impossible to be able to access those folks because the Thai government and Thai registered NGOs like Freedom Story cannot work across the border unless you're registered in those countries. Also very dangerous. They're very heavily guarded. We're seeing people, if you're not working out at this compound, they'll sell you to another compound. And once people escape, if they are able to escape, working through some of the legal issues on the ground is also really challenging. So, for example, they will have normally inadvertently committed some kind of immigration crime because maybe their visas were not actual visas to begin with, and that wasn't really even their fault. Maybe they've now overstayed their visa because they never officially left Thailand when they were trafficked. And so the Thai government helping, to ensure that victims really get the care that they need. And that if they want to go back home, as many people do, that they're able to leave and go back home. And it's just a very challenging situation for the Thai government. It's a very challenging situation for nonprofits as well.
Wow. And you said a new form of trafficking, and this seems like almost a type of labor trafficking where someone is exploited against their will to bring their labor is bringing value to others, right? But in this sense, it's bringing in cyber crime, it's bringing in the digital age, it's bringing in technology, and what a wild and fast moving industry that is, right? And this is fascinating because, yeah, we've all received emails like this before, right? I imagine many of our listeners have received an email that said, you owe this, or you have this free gift, or so forth and so on. And I think it's so easy to just write it off as, oh, wow, those scammers are mean or bad, or they don't know what they're doing. And what we're hearing from your perspective is this is a whole form. This is an organized crime of trafficking where people are being forced into this, coerced into this, and they don't have choices in this. Um, uh, so what are some what do we do about that? I mean, this is wild to me. I've never even heard of this as a form of trafficking. I've heard about it in other sectors, but not as a form of trafficking, and it makes so much sense. What are some of the talks in your circles of how to combat that?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a whole new world with this new form of trafficking. And it really represents just how quickly things are changing with, like you were saying, the digital world, new forms of technology or new forms of media. So it's an ongoing, wider challenge, but this is definitely a new form of trafficking for us. So we are working alongside our colleagues in the local Thai government to equip them and really work together to serve them, to help to serve victims as they come back over the border. Because of our geographic location, it's often the place people will return to first. So to ensure that people are cared for when they return, victims or survivors are cared for. And then also really raising awareness with local folks in the region and in the area to say, if you see a job advertisement in Myanmar, Laos, or Cambodia that says, you can make $1,000 a month. That's a huge amount of money over there. You can work online. All your expenses are paid for. If something seems too good to be true, it often is too good to be true. And really being aware of, some of the risks that those things bring in, and making sure that people really know that it's very difficult to get back out of that situation. And so if it even seems a little risky, the chances are it is risky, and just to be really careful and really aware of that.
Absolutely. So once people are in this, Yeah, there's so many loopholes to get them out. You mentioned legal. Are there situations where people have literally signed contracts? But do you see that happening or not so much?
Yep, absolutely. Sometimes people sign contracts. Sometimes, the contracts are perhaps in a language that they can't read. So they don't fully understand what they're signing. And so once let's say they try to negotiate to leave, someone comes and says, well, actually, you've said, this or that. Sometimes when they try to negotiate to leave, the trafficker or the person who's exploiting them might say, well, you can leave if you pay us $2,000 or $3,000, right? So then you're essentially sort of paying a bribe. And of course, there's a huge amount of risk with that. They might let you go and they may ask you for twice as much. Um, and for people that are overwhelmingly seeking these opportunities in order to improve their family's life, to kind of wipe out all of their family's savings and perhaps put them in a risky loan situation just to be able to get out of a trafficking situation, it's just heartbreaking. And then on top of that, like the violence. So, it's just a very violent, doing kind of what we have traditionally seen in the industry as kind of rescues or extractions of people is almost impossible and unfeasible because of the violence and then some of the corruption that's happening as well. So, and just again, like I said, you're not legally able to operate in a country that you're not registered in. And so, there's restrictions there, as unfortunate as that is.
Yeah. So difficult to get them out once they're in. All the more reason why prevention, what y'all are doing, is so important, right? It seems like it's a lot easier and a lot more productive and successful that if we can be educated and letting people know about this in advance and it never gets to that point, then we don't have to go, then there's not all those hoops that we have to get through just to get people out. And not that it's not worth that, it is. It's just sometimes they can't, right? I mean, there's just not the ability to get people out of these things. And it's a lot more difficult to do that. This is all incredibly eye-opening. Um, it's also a little sad, right? I mean, we hear so many things and we hear so many about the problems, and we need to take those seriously. We need to be hearing about these things because if we don't hear them, it doesn't mean they're not happening. And yet, let's breathe some hope into this. What's a personal story of success that you've seen through Freedom Story because of the work y'all do?
So this is a personal story of success. It's going to start out a little sad. About a year ago, I was in the U.S. and visiting, and one of my coworkers said, "Oh, can I call you? Can I talk to you about something?" And it was, the day after Thanksgiving, and I said, "Yeah, no problem. Exactly this time of year." So she gives me a call and she tells me that one of our students has run away from home. She was living with her grandparents, so quite a big, skipped generation household. And it looks like she maybe met somebody online and ran away to, meet them. She was, she's probably 11 or 12. And wiped everything, left the devices. We have no idea where she is. And unfortunately, by the time her grandparents had come to us with this, it had been, quite some time. And so we put together missing child posters. We shared it extensively online. We shared it with our community. We talked to the local police. There's very little that can be done. And time kept going by. A couple of weeks went by. And I was, I knew this student. I had met her. I was pretty undone by this situation and very emotionally impacted by it. And my coworkers, who are incredible and always serving me as much as I try to serve them, sort of said to me, Lucy, I do think you need to be prepared for a lot of different potential outcomes. Like, I think we don't know if she's alive. We don't know where she is. And, I was trying as much as I could to really prepare for that. And then I get the call that unbelievably, one of our other scholarship students had seen her at a gas station in the province where we work. And so we were able to then call the local police in that district to go and pick her up from where she was. And now she's safe and she's back, and she is actually living with her mother now. And so we've been able to kind of reunite her with her mom, and she's doing a lot better. She went back to school and has been able to finish the school year and is in just a much better place. And we worked with her to kind of help get some aftercare for her and really talk through how that was, a really dangerous situation. She had essentially been groomed and targeted by like a 21-year-old guy, somebody much older than her. And so as difficult as it was to go through that, it was amazing to see what can be done on the prevention side to really stop things from getting any worse, and how we had been able to mobilize a network of people to really identify her and be able to put her back in a safe situation. So I think victories like that mean a lot. We hear about 50 million people, I think is the newest estimate of people living in slavery or trafficking. And it's very overwhelming. And there's, some evidence that it's getting worse. There's some evidence that things are getting better. It's hard to say. COVID has definitely made people more vulnerable in our experience. But when I think about the individual lives that have been changed and what that represents in terms of breaking generational cycles of vulnerability, how for our kids, not only will they not be trafficked, but almost certainly their children will not be trafficked and so on. And so how much that really represents for us, it really is what kind of keeps me going. And knowing those individual lives have been really transformed is really encouraging as well.
Wow. And the generational effect that can have, that over time, this can really change whole communities. It can change the whole situation. You mentioned COVID changing things. What changed during COVID when it comes to the trafficking problem?
Mm-hmm. So both, I think we've seen an increase in online exploitation. So both kind of child abuse material, videos and photos of children being produced and sold online on the dark web and places like that. But then also, I think COVID really decreased a lot of people's economic buffer. They might have lost a job or lost wages, or their wages might have decreased, or maybe they're not working as much and therefore they're making less money. And when, like I told in that story, you're talking about like $100 of a buffer, that's really not much money. And even in Thailand, where money goes, very far, it's easy for that to get wiped away by a medical expense or school fees or some sort of unexpected payment that you have to make. And those, again, like going back, like we were saying, to poverty as an economic driver, that really can put that people back in those places of vulnerability and make people desperate and kind of willing to perhaps take risks that they wouldn't have taken maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. And employers maybe are feeling the crunch too, right? So they're perhaps more incentivized to be more exploitative.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. Technology, I feel like, is a theme that kind of keeps coming up in this whole interview, right? And the power technology can have for both evil and good, for both, right? And I think it's almost a challenge to us, to anyone who's listening. Are we going to master and harness this for good? Or are we going to let it be used for exploitation for bad, whether that's personally or across the world, people in call centers, right? What are we going to do with this? Because it's only going to become more and more a part of our world. And I think there's a challenge to the fighters, the people who want to be involved, the people who want to bring light, the people who want to do good, to say, okay, let's be master over this technology, not let's let this technology be master over us in the way we buy, in the way we consume, in the way any of these things. We need to make sure that we are paying attention to that and being ahead of that. This has all been incredibly fascinating to learn. I think my last question for you would just be, for our listeners, what's a piece of advice you would give them if they want to get involved, right? Most of them probably aren't going to come move over to Thailand and join Freedom Story. Though, if you want to do that, listeners, feel free to reach out to Lucy about that. But what are some tangible next steps, or a next step you would encourage for our listeners?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually love what you said about being really thoughtful in our buying, in our purchasing. I think that is potentially, for most of us, the biggest way that we can contribute. There's so many really wonderful ethical clothing brands these days. Able springs to mind, Outland Denim springs to mind, that are either being made by survivors of trafficking themselves, or at least really paying people a fair and livable wage. I love Nisolo shoes, for example. They're made in Guatemala. And so I think being really thoughtful in that way. And there's so many more options in there where 5 or even 10 years ago. And so that's a huge thing. Get involved. I mean, I think in terms of like giving financially, that is what, nonprofits, we can't do the work we do without folks giving. So whatever makes sense for you sustainably, for you and your family, or you and your household, right? To give, whether it's monthly or once a year, to projects or to organizations that you love, is a great way to get involved and to feel connected. We host learning trips. We're going to be hosting some learning trips next year for folks that are interested and able in coming, to Thailand and really seeing both the issue, but then also kind of meeting different organizations, not just Freedom Story, but different organizations that are working on trafficking. That's kind of what we do in lieu of like a mission trip or a vision trip. Come out with us. We'll show you different perspectives of folks working in the ecosystem of trafficking, and how they're fighting trafficking. And it'll help you really learn about the issue, because we fully believe, we focus on prevention, but we're working in an ecosystem to kind of build a net that really helps to protect people. So those are some ways to get involved.
Yeah. And when is that going to be again, did you say?
The trip is going to be in January. You can find out more if you search kind of Freedom Story Travel. You can find out some more information, or you can reach out to me. Another way that I think can be a bit different is if you are somebody who has like a skill set or has some time to be able to volunteer for nonprofits. A lot of nonprofits like Freedom Story, where our support team is quite small. We're very scrappy. We're kind of like everybody's doing everything. And if you're somebody that has, a skill in accounting or marketing or graphic design or, strategy or communications, like reach out to your favorite nonprofit and just say, hey, like I would love to give you, 5 hours a week or 5 hours a month to help, with your graphic design needs or whatever the case may be, because that might be something that they don't have in-house as a skill and that they might really benefit from.
Wow. So some things you shared, you can volunteer your skill set, right? Maybe what is your career? What are you good at? And how can you maybe offer that as a service to some nonprofits like Freedom Story and other organizations that are in this work? You also mentioned that people actually could go to Thailand without near as much of a commitment. How amazing is that? So if that's something you're interested in, taking that trip, go check out, as Lucy just said, Freedom Story, and look up their travel section. And then lastly, and once again, it's we just see this all the time. How are we buying our stuff? And we heard it at the beginning of this episode. If coffee was constantly sourced ethically with the producer in mind, there may have been a whole situation where people didn't have to say, I just need my daughter to take care of me. I just need my daughter to take care of me, because they can start to dream. It's no longer about just the immediate needs. We can start to dream and look ahead. And even that can be a preventative measure in and of itself. And so love that you shared that. Lucy, thank you so much for being on the show. I learned a lot. I hope our listeners learned a lot. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be on.
Oh, you're so welcome, Philip. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for everything that you all are doing. I love your mission.
Yeah, thank you. And to all of our listeners, thank you for listening in. Please stay tuned. We have some more podcasts coming out soon. We've had some incredible interviews, and just love the journey that we've been on learning from others. So be sure to stay tuned, and we'll catch you next time.